Divorced Not Divided. I'm Meg Phillips.
I'm Nathan Burkhart.
And we are so excited because we're bringing a special guest on today to talk with you guys about specifically the family unit and the psychology connected to the family unit and divorce. So joining us soon will be our friend, Dr. Lyndsay Brooks. She's a psychologist licensed in the states of Texas, Illinois, Washington, and California. Dr. Brooks earned her master's degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis on marriage and family at Pepperdine University. Also earned her doctorate degree in clinical psychology at Pepperdine University, completed an APA accredited internship, and then received postdoctoral training with the Department of Veterans Affairs. She's also served as an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University and offers consultation to other professionals as needed. We're really excited to hear what she has to say today.
Pretty accomplished.
I know.
Yeah. One thing that we do want to make sure that you all know is statements made by Dr. Brooks on podcasts, social media, or other similar public forums are solely for educational purposes, and they're not to be considered as clinical advice or treatment.
Yeah. Again, we are a lifestyle podcast, and even when we bring on professionals, this needs to be treated for educational purposes only, specifically with Dr. Brooks' advice and comments today. So let's go ahead. Let's bring on Lyndsay.
Hey, Lyndsay.
Hey. Hi. Thank you for joining us today. This is Dr. Brooks.
I'm so happy to be here.
I know. We're going to do things a little bit different today. So we are actually going to start out with a comment because we got a comment on our first video that we thought would be an important topic to discuss. And like we said before, we brought on Dr. Brooks to help us kind of navigate this because this kind of has a little bit more of a psychological vibe to it. So we need someone who has their doctorate in psychology. So that's you.
Happy to be here and be part of this important conversation.
Awesome. Nate, do you want to read the comment?
Yeah, sure. So this is the comment that was left on our social. Divorce is necessary division. They don't call it univorce for a reason. Quit tarnishing the family unit by glorifying alternatives that will ultimately crumble. While you're at it, save yourself from this nonsense. Children in a stable two-parent household are orders of magnitude better off than any other circumstance. You have denied them of that for what?
So, I mean, first off, I don't think they might have listened to the entire video. They kind of know exactly, if they did, they'd know.
That divorce sucks.
Right.
Minute 7.
Yep. And that we're not glorifying it in any way.
No.
I think what this did for us, though, was give us some really interesting content to break down and navigate, because I think people do have this question. I think people really work hard to maintain a nuclear family unit. And I think that in healthy circumstances, that's a really valid thing to do. Mm-hmm. But the reason we brought on Dr. Brooks today is because we want to kind of discuss the mental health of a family unit in different scenarios, different circumstances. So I think kind of starting off, I'm curious. I'll be calling Dr. Brooks Lyndsay once in a while, but, just bear with me. I'm curious, Lyndsay, because when we're looking at the mental health of the family unit as a whole, like what type of statistics are there surrounding like divorce in general, or surrounding, like what are we looking at when we're looking at divorce? Like when people, like where's this myth come from?
Yeah, I think this is a really great place to start the conversation because, I think there's some outdated and false narratives floating around out there about, stay together at all costs for the good of kids or things like that. And really, it's so much more nuanced than that, as are most health and mental health issues, right? It's not an all or nothing type of question. can divorce be associated with some negative outcomes for the adults and children in a family unit? Sure, of course. In some cases, there can be mental health concerns or academic or social adjustment difficulties. But really, some of the more recent long-term studies and meta-analyses actually show that the large majority of adults adjust quite well post-divorce, as do children. Most children are overwhelmingly resilient in the face of divorce. And in some cases, it's even actually children fare better post-divorce, especially when there were high conflict relationships preceding the divorce. So children tend to do better, which makes sense, right? That kids are going to do better in an environment where there's less conflict, less, stress.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as is the case for many situations, many adjustment related situations, moving, losing a job, divorce, any of these kinds of big life changes, it's not the event itself that necessarily predicts how someone's going to do after the fact. It's how the situation is handled. It's the existing risk or protective factors that are present. So there are a lot of individual and collective factors that can contribute to how somebody does post a big life change. And some of those include things like having positive coping skills, having good social support. You know, there was one study that looked at people who practiced, who in the study, they engaged in just kind of stream of consciousness talking about their divorce, and researchers looked at what the content of the person's kind of conversation with themselves was about. And the people who showed more self-compassion actually showed better outcomes after divorce. Kids who have a strong attachment or positive relationship with just at least one parent do better after divorce. So this idea that it's all or nothing, or everyone that goes through divorce is going to do badly, or every kid who goes
These massive generalizations, right? And I look at it like this, right? When we were married, I think my mental health was negatively impacting my kids because my behavior was just bad and my mental health was bad, right? And for me, I think I've been a better dad over the last at least year. And I've used this as an opportunity to teach our kids about how to handle conflict at the same time. It's like, how do you deal with somebody when you're in an argument with them? Because Megan and I did fight,
A lot.
and they saw that, right? And it's like, how do you teach them how to forgive? How do you teach them how to get past that? How do you teach them to love? And so I love what you just said there, because all divorce is very individually based on the given circumstances that are around. Some have got drug addiction, some have got physical abuse. Is that what's healthy for a kid to be around seeing? Probably not.
And and you're absolutely right about the modeling piece. And that is even borne out in the research that shows that kids who witness positive problem solving and conflict resolution learn those skills. And then they use those skills in their own friendships and relationships and go on to have better adjustment socially. So there can be a lot of important lessons that are learned through watching positive conflict resolution. And then you're absolutely right. Some of these things, would be very different in a relationship where there's, let's say, safety concerns, physical harm or abuse or substance use, right? Those are going to have different outcomes. But I think this idea that, you know, divorce always ends in some sort of harm is actually a myth, and B, not borne out in the research. And in many cases, it's actually quite beneficial for people, for adults to go on and have self-actualization, learn who they are again, kind of get in touch with themselves and their identity, and for kids to be in a less high conflict environment.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that, because I think that's what Nate, you and I have been able to do too, because we're busy figuring out who we are after this event. But I think that also shows our kids too that valuing self-exploration and the need to know who you are as an individual will only help them once they get into relationships.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There is actually one article that I was reading, a paper that talked about um, self-concept following marital dissolution, and it showed that people who had improved clarity in their sense of self or their self-concept had better psychological well-being and adjustment after divorce. So I mean, um, I think that adjustment is a concept that is kind of in psychology defined as sort of any kind of life stressor, big change that is of course going to be associated with some sort of stress, maybe some emotional depression or anxiety or whatnot. But for the majority of people, that resolves, as things stabilize and a new sense of normal becomes, put into place. And so this narrative that everyone is going to have all of these horrible outcomes is actually not true. Most people do quite well. Now, that doesn't mean everyone does, and some people need professional support to get through that adjustment period. And I think that's also something that's really important, is knowing when you need help, knowing when you might need a mediator or an attorney or a psychologist or a medical doctor, whatever it is, getting professionals involved when you need them. But the idea that every breakup or divorce is going to lead into some sort of pathology is not necessarily accurate.
Yeah. And
So
I mean, I'm not proud of the fact that I'm divorced. I want to get that straight. I'm proud with how I'm learning to handle divorce.
yeah.
I'm not proud of the fact that my marriage split up. I hope that my kids have stable marriages and don't look at divorce as something that they can just go into. But at the same time, after going through all of my hurt, I'm really proud of what I've built with Megan today. And I'm proud of the fact that my kids can see that they've got two parents that still respect each other. That's what I'm proud of.
Absolutely. And I think this idea that I think in our society, we focus a lot on pathology or what's wrong or what's the problem. And we forget about this kind of idea that generally humans have this kind of tendency towards resilience in the face of stress and tendency towards self-actualization and improvement. Now, it's very individualized, whatever sort of pre-existing genetic or social or environmental risk factors each person may have that will mediate how likely you are to be resilient in the face of stress. But that's I think that's where this conversation is so much more nuanced than some would want it to be. And I think many people actually have a lot of protective factors in place that they're not even aware of.
So like everything that you're saying is amazing. I'm looking specifically at this comment from this individual, and I think you covered it really well, which is where they said, quit tarnishing the family unit by glorifying alternatives. So we've talked about that, but and that will ultimately crumble. And while you're at it, save yourself from this nonsense. It's not nonsense. Moving forward in the way we moved forward is the most healthy way our unit could move forward. And with our circumstances, this is not something that's going to crumble. This is something we're building brick by brick that's going to have a strong foundation, because we truly care about our kids' mental health, and we truly care about our own mental health. And since the divorce, I think we talked about it, that we have a better relationship now, as friends.
Our kids know that we're divorced because we talk to them.
Right.
They haven't seen the fighting and the division to a large degree because we've been able to work on that. And I don't think that is confusing to them, because every divorce is different.
Right.
And the one thing that we wanted to be able to do is work with them on that and stay in open communication with them on it. because they have nothing else to pull from. I mean, they might see how their friends' parents who might be divorced have handled that. Holden's come to me before and said, oh, they're not, my friends are divorced and they don't handle it that way. But he also has friends that do handle it our way.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to kind of look at it that way.
I just thought it was fascinating that the research is saying that the resiliency and moving in a way that where people have a sense of self, and if you nourish that, then this isn't something that's going to crumble.
Right.
Or that's nonsense. This is something that's actually going to make this process, the process we've decided to move forward with after divorce, even stronger.
Sure.
Absolutely. And I think like one of the kind of key takeaways from all the literature in this area is that generally lower levels or reduced levels of hostility equals better outcomes for both adults and kids.
Oh, that's cool.
So, I mean, it's, high levels of conflict, high levels of hostility, whether that be pre-divorce or during the divorce. So I think everything you are both saying is so important, how you're even very intentionally communicating about co-parenting decisions post-divorce. You're reducing the hostility. There's no hostility there. So that is automatically going to have better outcomes, right? And so it may not look the same for every family. Maybe there are some people where there were issues of safety concerns or coerciveness or control or, abuse, where non-hostile communication isn't possible. And maybe that's where there needs to be professionals involved or other people that do handoffs with kids or things like that, right? But when there is this ability to communicate without hostility or to decrease the hostility in the environment, that alone leads to better outcomes for both adults and kids, essentially, right?
Right. So not just the mental health of our children, but
Of yourselves.
yeah.
I mean, because also, how can you show up as a parent if you're not doing well yourself, right?
Right. And I think that goes back to my favorite thus far. I have a favorite Nathan quote so far in our podcast, and I even posted it on our socials. But
I don't have any favorite Megan quotes yet. I'm kidding. There's probably some in there. I gotta rewatch.
What about that quote at the beginning that you wish you said that I said?
I think my favorite one is you don't want to have bloody parents.
Well, yeah.
That one was my favorite.
That actually, my favorite one of yours leads into that. But it's if you keep cutting each other, what was it?
If you keep cutting each other, you're just gonna fall apart.
If you keep cutting each other, if those new wounds only are gonna make this process that you're trying to accomplish harder for your own mental health and healing and harder for your children. Mm-hmm. And then I followed up with, you're just going to have blood, you're going to bleed out and have bloody parents.
Yeah.
I'm great at this stuff.
It's so true though, right? I mean, I think this idea of rather than thinking of, all or nothing outcomes, we have to think about mediators, right? What are the risk factors or protective factors that mediate a certain outcome? Because it's not going to be the same for every person, and everyone has different pre-existing risk factors or protective factors, right? Different people have different levels of social support and belongingness or senses of self-worth already pre-established. Some people have higher levels of anxiety or depression life stressors. So all of these different factors sort of mediate how someone is going to navigate a major life change like the dissolution of a relationship. And so I think knowing those things about yourself can then point you in the direction of what kind of support, where can I bolster my protective factors, and how can I reduce my risk factors, right?
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I think we want to transition into, so we've talked a lot about kind of research that surrounds divorce when you are, we talked a lot about this, but I want a little bit more information about like families that intentionally, like there may be some toxicity there. There may be, they probably do need a divorce, or they need at least support to maintain a marriage,
family
right?
therapy and
Yeah.
whatnot.
That where they're refusing the options because they want to make sure to maintain a nuclear family unit. Is there research on like what happens? I mean, I'm guessing I kind of know the answer, but like research surrounding the mental health of them and the kids?
Yeah, what happens when someone cares so much about keeping their family unit alive that that they're going through trauma and abuse themselves or their children are in order to keep the nuclear family alive?
I mean, I think, it's a good question. I think that a lot of the, literature in this area really focuses on what are the negative impacts of being in a highly stressful or high conflict home or environment, whether that is preceding a divorce or not. Just the idea that high conflict environments, chaotic environments, environments with, lack of consistency or predictability. These are all things that we know lead to worse outcomes. And so if a separation or a divorce is going to decrease those things, then it stands to reason that that would also decrease the, negative effects of staying in that environment. I think that some of how kids adjust to divorce or, staying in a chaotic environment depends in part on their age and stage of development, and so there may be negative impacts, but how a teenager is going to react is going to be very different to how like a young child is going to react, right? There may be like acting out and behavioral problems with a child and social problems and friend problems with a teenager, for example, right? And so I think how the stress shows up may be different, but staying in an unsafe or chaotic environment is definitely not something most mental health professionals would recommend that I'm aware of. And I think
Right.
that, um, knowing the negative effects that we've seen of things like psychological abuse, physical abuse, substance use, high conflict homes, unpredictable routines and schedules, all those kinds of things can lead to negative outcomes. So I think it stands to reason that if a change in the dynamics of a family unit and how a family unit is functioning or where a kid is living decreases that stress. Um, Again, it's not the divorce itself, it's how it is, handled that it
Sure.
really predicts the outcome.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I know from like just pulling from my own life stuff, right? I'm somebody that tries to be very chill in like everyday life. But I know from some of the stuff that we were going through, and this isn't anything against you, Megan, but I know when we were going through our divorce, there was a lot of times where I felt emotionally unsupported, or I felt like that I was almost, I don't want to say emotionally abused. I don't think that you're an emotionally abusive person, but I felt like at a lot of times I was just extremely confused and I was growing more codependent by the day. I think that I still have triggers today in just normal relationships where I have fear of being left behind.
Right.
And all of that stuff that I've unpacked in therapy and I continue to talk to with friends and stuff like that. But I know just speaking from my own mental health spot, that was tough to go through.
And there's no offense taken because when we were in that unit, and if we're talking about being in a unstable or unhealthy situation, I was incredibly unhealthy. So my behaviors at that time, I take accountability for the fact that I was not showing up as my best self and I was not exhibiting the type of support that you needed.
Sure.
Because I was going through it too, and I was trying to figure things out. So, no, that's really valid.
I think you're bringing up such an important point, Nate, because, one thing I recommend to couples who I've worked with who do end up dissolving the relationship is focusing on that individual therapy work to look at what are my own personal, relationship history, patterns, tendencies. Where do I tend to get hung up on my attachment style being overly anxious or overly avoidant or whatever it might be for that person? What are my tendencies in a relationship that I don't want to repeat in the future, right? That can
Right.
be a place for somebody to go focus on their own work, that can be really fruitful and lead to that flourishing that we're talking about.
Love that, because I was always a secure attachment style. And I would say there was a period, I'm working my way back towards secure. I think I'm real close, but I'm getting there. But I do think that there was a period, and other people could probably see this, where that went to an anxious attachment style. I've never been avoidant, but I've went to more of an anxious attachment style where there was fear if somebody didn't text me back in 2 minutes, if the relationship was done.
Right.
And that's just my own mental health stuff from going through a relationship that we had that was training me through experiences to have fear if you don't hear back over a certain period of time.
Right.
So therefore, you don't, when you don't have a secure attachment style, you don't look for people that have secure attachment styles. You look for people that even you out. So you look for other anxious people or other avoidant people.
And then end up in something that's maybe not stable or that's chaotic and leading to even more problems down the road. So I think, that self-reflective practice we've talked about already, that self-concept piece is so big, but also looking at your own relationship patterns and histories and what was modeled for you in relationships. And then what we've already talked about, which is this idea of modeling healthy communication and problem solving for your own kids, which it sounds like you're both doing so beautifully. And I think this does present such an awesome opportunity for them to see that, conflict doesn't have to be bad, right?
Right.
High conflict, hostile conflict is different than disagreeing, right? And so.
Aw. Hey, Nate, about that self-concept stuff. This is when I think, eventually we can start getting into how we maybe even do an episode about how we take care, how we do self-care to make sure that we are taking responsibility for our own mental health. And then we can get into your Nate dates again, because those were fun
Yeah.
to hear about.
They were great for the one person that was on them for me. It's all good.
I love that. I love that. I want to hear. I also think you're bringing up self-care is so important too. And I think there's a lot of talk of self-care in this really kind of fluffy way of like, take a bubble bath or, whatnot, go on a walk. But actually, like, what is realistic self-care and what kind of supports can be involved in it that are community based and not just something you have to do in isolation by yourself? Because one of the other protective factors on adjusting after stressful life situations is about community and social support. And so, how can that self-care include very realistic things that are attainable and not adding more stress or burden to yourself?
I would love to talk to you about loneliness, because
I think that that's something that I went through a lot, and there's still times that I feel lonely, but when a relationship ends, feeling lonely can drive you crazy. At least I felt like I was going crazy. Where I've done a lot better is surrounding myself with other people that I know love me and support me on a professional level and a friend level. And where I've done best as of late is by loading up projects like this podcast, for example, or doing my business consulting or working at the Performing Arts Center and surrounding myself with art and things I love, because that's kept my brain from these like cycling thoughts that just put me in a really tough spot, right? And therefore, like, makes you seek out any type of attention that you can get because you just feel lonely or you just sit there depressed.
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. And loneliness is this human experience that everyone feels from time to time, but feeling prolonged periods of loneliness can be really, um, really an isolating experience. And so I think you've brought up so many of the antidotes to loneliness, which are, surrounding yourself by other people, but also it doesn't always mean not being alone, right? So you talked about like finding meaning and purpose in the activities that are aligned with your values, right? Like taking steps in your life that are in this valued direction. Like, what are my core values, and am I doing things in my life that are aligned with my core values that can bring this sense of purpose and meaning to somebody's life that might decrease those feelings of loneliness or isolation, even if you're not with a lot of other people sometimes, right? But
Yep.
surrounding yourself with other people who share those values or care deeply about you are also other ways to combat loneliness. And I think being aware of when you're feeling that way so that you can do some of these anecdotes and coping strategies is really important. That's why I think for some people, even if you've never sought therapy before, being able to go talk to somebody to develop this language for yourself of starting to identify like what emotion is coming up for me, because that is not something we're taught as kids, right? We don't have this language for emotions, and it is complex and layered, and sometimes it's hard, even for the most kind of psychologically in tune person to even realize what it is that you're feeling. So for me, hearing you say that, just step one was that you could identify that you were feeling lonely was the most important step, because then you were able to figure out, what do I need to do to combat this loneliness, right?
Yeah. That's cool.
I've had people come up to me and say that they don't get what Megan and I are trying to do. And most of these people have had their own bad relationships and would never be in a position to do what Megan and I are trying to do post divorce. I still don't know exactly how to answer that question for people. I know I don't owe them an answer, but at the same time, I've always tried to think about how I articulate that to them.
Like when people are like, what are you doing? Or if they even challenge it, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some people say that they don't think that that's healthy for the kids to do
Yeah.
that. Or I've had some people within this like last week say to me, "Oh, I don't think I'd be ever able to do that with the person that I divorced from. I don't really understand how you could do that."
Right.
When
So,
you say that, do you mean like the collaborative way you're approaching it, or?
yeah, I think that there's a lot of,
Feelings there as far as I think a lot of those situations might have had different circumstances involved, or they have been told by others that that's just not possible. And again, I'm not trying to owe anyone an answer. I just kind of am trying to figure out a way to help people see in my brain how I think it's possible to create a friendship with somebody if you've had enough time to heal and you can look at that person in a more platonic way. And I think that's what's hard for some people is some people don't understand how I can look at Megan in a platonic way. And because of our given circumstances, it's very easy to. But I would say that like I would never want to try to convince somebody of that, but being able to make sure that they understand that has always been important to me, because I like to make sure that people understand. And maybe that's just a narcissistic part of me that's trying to make someone understand that I shouldn't say, but
I don't
I
know.
don't think so. I mean, it sounds like you're saying that you already recognize that the way you are both approaching this may not work for everybody,
Right.
right? But you are offering this as one possible way to approach what has sort of historically been seen as this stigmatized, negative, pathological choice in our society, that's actually not true. And you're offering this alternative narrative about what it could be like. And that doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. But I think that's what's so cool about both of you as human beings, as well as how you're approaching this, is that it is from this very open, non-judgmental stance. You're saying, look, this may not work for you if there's, safety concerns, or if you've had other issues that we don't necessarily have, but let us share how it's working for us. And maybe there is a tiny nugget of what we're doing that works for you.
Sure.
that's okay too, right? And if they don't understand, is it your job to explain it to them?
No.
Yeah.
No.
No. Yeah, say no. Really, because everybody just tells me I'm amazing. So
I'm
I don't know what
I'm a
really
people
nobody
pleaser
can-
by trade. That's another thing that I think I've learned about myself. So that need to feel like that they have to understand can fall into the people pleasing. Like, I want to make them happy, right? And
Yeah.
you don't have to make everybody happy. You just have to speak your truth and let them feel whatever they need to feel. And that's not hitting you over the head in a terrible way all the time. It's just what you need to do for yourself.
Yeah, I think when people do say like, how could that possibly work? Or I think I'm just pretty confident in saying like, this is just what's right for Nathan and I. And we feel that this is best for our kids and this is how we do it. And typically they either have follow-up questions or they're like, that's cool. I mean, I don't, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Which fits with the research that most people are resilient. Now, that's not to say if you're listening and you're thinking, I am not feeling resilient, things are really, really hard. There's nothing wrong with you, right? And a lot of people have those highest levels of distress in the immediate kind of process of and immediate aftermath of a separation. And then as time goes on in the couple of years following, most people tend to do a lot better. And so, but that doesn't mean that that's everybody. And a lot of these studies are averages, right? We're talking about statistical data. We're not talking about individual people. And so I think that's really important too, to remember that everyone's going to have a different experience. But I think hearing cool stories like yours can offer people hope and a place to come to hear that, you can approach these things with kindness, respect, humor, and not always have to have high degrees of conflict. That does not mean that's going to be for everyone, right? When there are personality factors, safety factors, all of those things involved, that may not be the case for everyone. But many people might really benefit from hearing your story. And I think it's very cool that you are so open to sharing it. Because I think there's little things you've shared that people might think, oh, I never even thought to try that.
Right. We've had a lot of people reach out to us who didn't go through a divorce but just went through a breakup. And I know I had one person reach out to me and they were like, just the transparency helps me out a lot to know I'm not alone. That when I feel like I'm going crazy and you're talking on the podcast about feeling like you're going crazy, it made me feel like that I wasn't the only one going bonkers here.
Yes, that is a concept called universality, right? As humans, we want to not feel alone or like we're the only person in the world going through something. So I think it can be really comforting to hear that other people go through this too and have come out the other side of it in a way that is not just like coping, but thriving, flourishing.
right. And I've had some people reach out that they aren't going through a divorce or they're not even married, but they're children of divorced families. And they say, I'm getting a couple that are just like, I'm going through emotions I didn't expect, such as like, why couldn't my parents have done this? Or, oh, wow, my anger that they didn't do this is actually valid. And I get to be sad. It's normal for me to be sad that they couldn't go this route with us. Or some people are like, I can't even believe you're able to sit at a table next to each other. We've gotten that a lot. Like they're like, you can be in the same room together, and we're like, yep. Like
It's all a front. That's just the way it looks on camera.
He's lying.
No, I am. I'm joking.
So it's interesting to see just different people get, like you said, getting the nuggets they're getting out of it that we didn't even predict would be there to be mined, so that's really special. I also think it's incredibly special that you've agreed to come on today and support us as we kind of go on this journey and to help kind of give, I think it's really valuable that our listeners have the insights from someone who's in this field that's working with people that are navigating big life transitions. So I just wanted to throw that out there, how much we appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Lyndsay. Obviously, we're not doctors, right? I've made that very clear. But I think what's important for people to know, these are conversations we can have with psychologists and therapists and lawyers and finance people as we continue to figure out this journey, including them in the conversation about how we do this better, I think is important, right? And it's like, and like you said, every given person comes with their own given circumstances that can't be replicated. And I think being able to at least talk about it and make sure that people understand what something so large and hard is doable with a bunch of help and conversations from other people, right?
Absolutely. I think that's maybe one of the biggest takeaways is you don't have to do this alone, and there are resources out there, whether that is from your own social support or professionals, there are resources available. And I'm happy to send some of them to you if you wanted to post some different resources for people to look into, to find therapists or to find mediators and that sort of thing, because I think, you know, having that ability to look for the resources to cope with the emotional struggles that are inherently going to go along with this is going to help mediate some of the negative outcomes and maybe even contribute to the flourishing for some people. And so I think being willing to consider having a therapist involved at some point in time is absolutely important, as well as just knowing that those resources are out there if you do need them down the road.
And I'm going to take you up on that because we just got our website live and there will be a resource page. So that the resources that Dr. Brooks sends to us will also be listed on our resource page. And that's divorced not divided.life. So
Not .com, .life.
.life, because we're a lifestyle podcast. But those resources will be there from those professionals that we touch base with, like Dr. Brooks. So that if you're listening and you're like, I actually would like to click on a resource, you can do that. So
wonderful. I will send this over to you, and I've loved being a part of this and having this very important conversation. And I just have so much respect for you guys and what you're doing here.
Thanks, Lyndsay. We'd love to have you
so
back
much.
for sure.
Yeah.
A big thanks to Dr. Brooks for joining us today. Yay! We love having Lyndsay. We're definitely going to have her back. So that wraps up the podcast for today.
Yeah.
We do invite you to join us on all of our social media. Do you want to list them off for us, Megan?
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow us on Facebook at Divorce Not Divided. You can follow us Instagram at Divorce Not Divided Podcast. Also, our website, like we said just a few minutes ago, is live. That's divorcednotdivided.life. And that's where you can find those resources from Dr. Brooks for today's episode. So we invite you to please check us out. Give us likes, give us 5-star reviews.
Subscribe and share. It helps boost that algorithm. If you like what you see, share it with people.
Or if you know someone that you think this information would be valuable to them, please share.
Sounds good. We
All
hope
right.
you all have a great week, everybody. We love you.